Okay, so we've all been there, right? Like palms are sweating, heart racing, and you're just like trying to remember what you were going to say about your greatest weakness. Job interviews, they can feel like such a high wire act.
Oh, they really can.
But what if we could kind of understand the science behind all those jitters and anxieties and aptly use that to our advantage?
That would be amazing, wouldn't it?
That's what we're diving into today.
I love it.
Yeah.
And you've given us some really great material to work with for this deep dive.
Awesome.
We have a practical podcast script here with tons of tips.
Okay.
And then also this research-heavy report.
Oh, cool.
That really gets into like the psychology of what's happening in these pressure cooker situations.
So we've got the what and the why.
Yes.
Which means we're not just going to like help you survive the interview. We're going to help you walk in feeling like ready, confident, like you're going to shine.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
Let's start by tackling kind of like why interviews can feel so difficult in the first place. The research report points to something called the blanking effect.
Okay, the blanking effect. Sounds a little ominous. What's the science behind that?
Well, it all comes down to stress. When we're under pressure, our bodies release cortisol. And cortisol, that can actually interfere with the prefrontal cortex.
Oh, wow.
The part of our brain that's responsible for clear thinking and memory.
So all those moments when you just completely blank?
Yes.
It's not just me.
Yeah, you're not alone.
There's a biological reason for that.
There is.
Our brains are literally sabotaging us in like the most crucial moments.
In a way, yeah. But knowing this can actually help us prepare better.
Okay.
For example, the podcast really emphasizes practicing your answers beforehand. And not just to memorize them,
Yeah.
but to actually train your brain to recall information even when you're under pressure.
Right. So it's like building those neural pathways so when the stress hits,
Yeah.
you're less likely to just like freeze up.
Exactly. And that brings us to, the podcast's emphasis on the first 90 seconds of the interview. They say those initial moments can really make or break your chances.
90 seconds. That doesn't seem like a lot of time to make an impact.
It's all about first impressions. Even like seemingly small things, like a weak handshake,
Oh, yeah.
can subconsciously influence how the interviewer perceives you.
So what can we do to make sure that those first 90 seconds really count?
Well, the report highlights some fascinating research on handshake dynamics. Apparently, there's an optimal pressure range for a handshake between 7 and 9.
There's science behind the perfect handshake.
There is.
I had no idea.
If it's too firm, it can seem aggressive. If it's too weak, it can signal a lack of confidence. They even recommend practicing your handshake.
With a pressure gauge or something.
Well, just, get a feel for it.
Okay, so it's not just about like what you say, it's about all these subtle cues and signals that you're giving off.
Exactly. And the research also suggests that like smiling genuinely can have a big impact on the interviewer.
Smiling. That seems almost too simple.
It might seem simple, but there's a neurological reason for it.
Okay.
Smiling releases dopamine, which is a feel-good neurotransmitter.
Right.
And that happens in both the person smiling and the receiver.
Oh, wow.
So a genuine smile can actually make the interviewer feel more positive and receptive to you.
So basically, smiling is like a strategic advantage in the interview.
It is. And, it also connects to another point the podcast makes about just being yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to come across as like robotic or rehearsed.
Right. It's about authenticity.
Exactly. The research actually shows that when we tell stories authentically, it activates mirror neurons in the listener's brain.
Wow.
Creating like a stronger connection.
So instead of just like listing off all my skills and accomplishments, I could tell a story about a time I used those skills to achieve a specific result.
Exactly. It brings your experience to life. And it helps the interviewer connect with you on a more personal level.
It's not just about what you say, it's about how you say it.
Precisely. And that brings us to another crucial part of interview prep. Research.
Sure.
We all know we should research the company, but this report takes it to like a whole new level.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What kind of research are we talking about here?
It goes way beyond just browsing the company website.
Okay.
The report recommends diving into like earnings calls.
Earnings calls.
To understand their priorities, analyzing their competitive landscape.
Wow.
Even using employee reviews on Glassdoor.
Interesting.
To get a sense of the company culture.
It's like being a detective, uncovering these hidden clues about what the company really values, where they're headed.
Exactly. And they say, use this research to your advantage. Weave in specific insights during the interview.
So instead of giving these generic answers, I could say something specific that I learned from an earnings call to show that I really understand their business goals.
Exactly. It's a great way to stand out.
Yeah, because most people probably aren't doing that.
Right. And speaking of standing out, the report also dives into this fascinating concept called wardrobe semiotics.
Wardrobe semiotics. Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
Essentially, it means that even your clothing choices can subconsciously influence how the interviewer perceives you.
So it's not just about looking professional. It's about sending the right message through what you wear.
Exactly. The research shows that certain colors, like navy blue, can increase perceptions of trustworthiness.
So maybe I should ditch my lucky red interview shirt.
You don't have to ditch it entirely, but maybe save it for a different occasion.
Okay.
The key is that your outfit is a part of your overall presentation.
Yeah.
So think about the signals you're sending.
This is fascinating. It's like every little detail of the interview matters.
It does. And that includes how you answer those classic behavioral questions. You know the one,
yeah.
you familiar with the STAR method?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Situation, task, action, result.
Yeah.
It's like the interview answer formula.
It's a great starting point. But the report actually introduces some interesting variations on the STAR method.
Okay, tell me more.
For example, there's STAR L, where you add a learning component to showcase how you've grown from your past experiences.
So it's not just about what you did, but what you learned from it.
Exactly.
Which I guess, especially if you're early in your career, you can highlight that you're adaptable and have a growth mindset.
Exactly. And then there's STAR C,
Okay.
which focuses on collaboration, to highlight your teamwork skills.
So if I was working on a project with other people, I could talk about how we work together to solve a problem.
Yes, and emphasize the team's success.
Got it.
And then for leadership roles, there's STAR I, where you really emphasize innovation, going beyond just describing what happened to actually proposing new solutions.
So it's like a STAR method toolkit. You can choose the right tool for the job.
Precisely. And speaking of tools, the report also suggests creating what they call an elevator pitch matrix to structure your answer to that dreaded "tell me about yourself" question.
Ooh, that question can be such a tough one.
Yeah.
It's so easy to ramble.
It is.
What's the elevator pitch matrix all about?
Well, it's a concise, under 90-second summary that covers like your professional identity,
Okay.
your value proposition,
Okay.
and how you strategically align with the company's goals.
So it's not just a summary of your resume. It's really highlighting why you're the perfect fit for this specific opportunity.
Exactly.
This is such valuable advice. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about, the science of interview stress, the importance of those first 90 seconds, the power of research and storytelling, even like the hidden messages our clothes can send. Is there anything else that this report covers?
Well, there's a whole section on mastering behavioral questions, including some really interesting techniques for like redirecting questions about weaknesses.
Ooh.
But maybe we should save that for part 2 of our deep dive.
That sounds like a great place to pick up. I'm already feeling more prepared just from this conversation.
That's the goal. Remember, job interviews can be challenging, but they're also an opportunity to really showcase your skills, connect with potential employers, and even learn more about yourself in the process.
Yeah, and with the right preparation and a little bit of science on our side, we can walk into that interview feeling confident and ready to shine.
Exactly. But before we move on to part 2, there's one more thing I wanted to mention from the podcast.
Okay, what's that?
It's about those common interview mistakes we were talking about earlier, like, talking too much or not researching the company enough.
Right.
Well, the report actually provides some data-driven insights that challenge some of those like conventional interview beliefs.
So you're saying some of those so-called mistakes
Yeah.
might not actually be as detrimental as we think.
That's what the data suggests. For example, the report debunks the myth that like the most qualified candidate always gets the job.
Oh, interesting.
It's more about being the right fit for the company culture and showing that you really understand their values and their goals.
Really, that makes sense. But what about the idea that like talking more equals more knowledge?
Right. Well, the report found that the optimal response length for holding an interviewer's attention is around 114 seconds.
It's not about like giving this super long-winded answer. It's about being concise and getting your point across.
Exactly. Quality over quantity. And finally, the report challenges this belief that you need to be overly confident to succeed.
So being a little humble can actually be an advantage.
Absolutely. Candidates who display what they call balanced communication, like a mix of confidence and humility, score significantly higher than those who come across as too assertive or arrogant.
So it's about being self-assured but also respectful and approachable.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot where you showcase your skills and your enthusiasm, but you're also demonstrating a willingness to learn and collaborate.
I love that. It's like all those old school interview myths are finally being busted by science.
Yes, and that's what makes this research so valuable. It helps us understand the psychology behind those interview dynamics and gives us concrete strategies to improve our performance.
Awesome. Well, on that note, I think we should take a quick break and come back for part 2, where we'll dive deeper into mastering those behavioral questions and those crucial techniques for redirecting questions about weaknesses.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it.
You do. We'll be right back. Welcome back.
We're back.
So before the break, we were talking about those tricky behavioral questions, the ones that always start with, like, tell me about a time when.
Oh, yeah.
And they kind of make you just, like, rack your brain for a good example.
They can be a bit daunting, it's true.
Yeah.
But remember, they're designed to assess how you've handled situations in the past.
Right.
Which gives the interviewer insight into how you might approach similar challenges in the future.
So it's all about predicting your future performance.
Yeah.
Based on your past behavior.
Exactly.
So how can we make sure we're giving, like, the best possible answers to these behavioral questions?
Well, we talked about the STAR method and its variations earlier.
Yeah.
The report goes a little deeper into how to use these frameworks effectively, especially when you're trying to showcase specific skills.
So let's say I'm interviewing for a role that requires strong problem-solving skills. How would I use the STAR method to really, like, highlight that?
Okay, so think back to a time when you faced a really challenging problem at work. Describe the task at hand, the actions you took to solve it, and the positive results you achieved. But here's where those variations come in.
Okay.
If you want to emphasize your learning agility, you could add a learning component to your answer.
Oh, using STAR L.
Exactly.
So I could talk about what I learned from that experience.
Yeah.
And how it made me a better problem solver.
Yes, it shows that you're not just capable, but you're self-aware and committed to continuous improvement.
Oh.
And if the role involves a lot of teamwork, you could use the STAR C variations to highlight your collaboration skills.
By explaining how I worked with others to solve the problem. And really emphasizing, like, the team's success.
Exactly. And then if the role requires a lot of innovative thinking, you could use the STAR I approach to really showcase that.
So going beyond just, like, what happened and, like, proposing new solutions or improvements?
Precisely. You're tailoring your answers to match what the employer's looking for.
These variations are so helpful. It's like having a secret weapon to tackle these behavioral questions. But let's be real. There's one question that we all dread. What is your greatest weakness? Oof.
Oh, yeah.
How do we answer that one without sounding totally incompetent?
Well, the report actually offers some really interesting strategies for this.
Okay.
It's all about framing it in a positive light,
Okay.
showing self-awareness and a growth mindset.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are these strategies?
Well, they call them temporal framing, growth narrative, and current application.
Got it.
With temporal framing, you acknowledge the weakness, but you place it in the past.
All right.
For example, you could say, early in my career, I struggled with time management.
So you're not, like, denying it.
Yeah.
But you're not dwelling on it either.
Exactly. Then you transition to the growth narrative, where you explain how you've overcome that weakness and turn it into a strength.
So I could say, like, this led me to develop better organizational skills and prioritize tasks more effectively.
Perfect. You're showing that you're not only aware of your weaknesses, but you've actually taken steps to address them.
And then the last one was current application.
Yes, you bring it to the present.
So I'd say something like, now I proactively schedule my day, use project management tools, and regularly review my priorities to make sure I'm staying on track.
Exactly.
I love that 3-step process. Acknowledge, evolve, apply.
It really turns a potentially negative question into an opportunity to showcase growth and self-improvement.
Because it shows that you're not perfect, but you're willing to work on yourself.
Exactly. And that's key. They're not looking for perfection. They want to see that you're capable of recognizing your areas for improvement and taking action to grow.
That makes me feel so much better. Okay, so we've prepped for the behavioral questions. We've tackled the weakness question. What about those awkward silences that sometimes happen in interviews? Any tips for handling those gracefully?
Well, the podcast had some advice about that.
Okay.
They emphasized strategic pauses.
Strategic pauses.
Not only do they give you a moment to collect your thoughts,
Right.
they can make you seem more thoughtful and composed.
So it's okay to not, like, fill every silence with words.
Yes, silence can actually be a good thing.
Interesting.
In fact, the report cited research showing strategic pauses can actually increase information retention.
Oh, wow. So the interviewer is more likely to remember what I said if I just pause every now and then.
It's like giving their brain a moment to process what you've just said.
That's fascinating.
And while we're talking about neuroscience, the report also went into this really interesting concept called cognitive affective mapping.
Okay, cognitive affective mapping. That sounds intense.
It's a mouthful.
What is that?
Well, it means that our thoughts and emotions are interconnected. And when we simulate experiences, like let's say in a role play scenario, it activates those connections in our brain, helping us prepare not just mentally, but emotionally as well.
So it's like a mental and emotional workout for those high-pressure interview situations.
Exactly.
I like that.
And the podcast emphasized role-playing as a prep technique.
Okay.
It helps you practice your answers, anticipate potential questions,
Yeah.
and just get comfortable with the overall flow of the interview.
Especially for people who get nervous in interviews. It's like a dress rehearsal.
Yeah.
So how do we make sure our role-play sessions are actually effective?
The report gives some great tips for that.
Okay.
First of all, make the simulation as realistic as possible.
Okay, so not just practicing in front of the mirror.
Right. Find someone to be the interviewer.
Okay.
And try to mimic the actual interview environment.
So if the interview is going to be on Zoom,
Yeah.
I should practice on a Zoom call.
Exactly.
Okay.
The more realistic, the better.
It's like training for a marathon. You wouldn't just run on a treadmill. You'd want to try to simulate the race conditions as much as possible.
It's a great analogy.
Yeah.
The report also recommended focusing on specific skills or challenges that you want to address during the role play.
So for example, if I know I have a tendency to ramble,
Yeah.
I could practice being more concise and to the point.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or if you struggle with those, tell me about a time when questions. Practice coming up with those examples and weaving them into STAR method answers.
This is great advice. What about after the role play? Is there anything we should be doing to review and improve our performance?
Yes. They emphasize a structured debriefing process.
Okay.
One technique they suggested was video analysis, where you actually watch yourself back and pay attention to your nonverbal communication.
Oh, wow. We're going to become masters of micro-expression reading, like those FBI agents on those TV shows.
Well, maybe not to that level, but the point is to become more aware of those nonverbal cues. Are you conveying confidence and enthusiasm through your posture and facial expressions?
Okay.
Or are you betraying nervousness by fidgeting or avoiding eye contact?
That's a level of self-awareness I had not considered before.
It's important.
So video analysis, that's all about the nonverbals. What else did they recommend?
Well, they suggested verbal pattern mapping,
Okay.
where you listen back to your responses and pay attention to your verbal patterns. Are you using a lot of filler words?
Yeah,
are your sentences rambling?
Okay.
Or are you speaking clearly and concisely?
So identifying those verbal tics that we all have.
Exactly.
That can kind of distract from the message.
Yes. And then finally, they suggested doing a strategic gap analysis.
Strategic gap analysis.
This involves comparing your actual responses to the ideal responses you'd want to give.
So figuring out where I could have been more articulate or persuasive or more to the point.
Exactly. And by analyzing those gaps, you can identify specific areas to improve on for next time.
It's like turning every role play session into a learning opportunity.
That's the goal.
To get better and better.
Yes. It's about treating each interview as a mini experiment where you test different strategies, gather data, and continuously improve your performance.
I love that. It takes the fear and the uncertainty out of it and makes you feel more in control.
Exactly. And that brings us to another key point the podcast made about following up after the interview.
Okay.
We all know we should send a thank you note, but the report outlined what they call a strategic follow-up sequence.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What is this strategic sequence?
It starts with a 24-hour email.
Okay.
Where you not only thank the interviewer for their time, but you reinforce a few key points from your conversation, using specific triggers to jog their memory.
So it's like a personalized recap to keep me top of mind.
Precisely. Then about 72 hours later, they suggest interacting with the interviewer on LinkedIn. Maybe sharing a relevant industry article.
Oh, interesting.
Or commenting on one of their posts.
Okay.
And then about a week after the interview, they recommend sending what they call a value add, like a white paper analyzing a challenge you discussed during the interview.
Wow, that's going above and beyond.
It is, but it shows initiative, thoughtfulness, and a genuine interest in the company.
So it's not just about saying thank you. It's really about showing your expertise.
Yeah.
and that you're genuinely interested in this company, in this role.
Exactly. It's about leaving a lasting impression.
Okay, so we've covered the follow-up. Is there anything else we need to be doing after the interview?
Well, the report also emphasized the importance of post-interview analysis.
Wait, so the learning doesn't stop even after we send that final email?
It shouldn't. It's all about continuous improvement.
Okay.
They encourage you to treat every interview like a mini experiment.
Okay.
Develop what they call performance analytics.
Like what?
Like scorecards, to assess different aspects of your interview.
So like how well I answered the questions or...
Yeah, things like your verbal fluency.
Oh.
How successfully you redirected those difficult questions. The consistency of your nonverbal communication.
Got it.
How effectively you demonstrated your value.
So you're basically turning every interview into a learning opportunity
Exactly.
to get better for next time.
Yes. This data-driven approach can help you identify your strengths and weaknesses.
And refine your approach.
Exactly.
I love this. It takes the sting out of rejection and turns it into valuable feedback.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Okay, so we've covered so much ground here, from the science behind first impressions to, the art of strategic follow-up. What's the big takeaway for our listeners?
The big takeaway is that job interviews, they're a blend of psychology, performance, and strategy.
Okay.
Preparation is key.
Yeah.
But it needs to be intelligent, insight-driven, and constantly refined.
So it's not about memorizing canned answers.
Yeah.
Or trying to be someone you're not.
No, it's about understanding the science and using that to your advantage.
Okay, so before we move on to part 3, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder. Knowing what we now know about the science of communication and first impressions, how might you adjust your pre-interview routine to really stand out?
That's a great question.
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
Well, we'll be right back after a short break.